Hello, it's Frank Norris and my colleague Stan Johnson on my left, and we make up the Frank and Stan Chat, which is broadcast every week, tends to be the end of the week. And we're here doing this today on, I think, what's probably going to be one of the warmest days of the year. So are you ready for this, Stan?
Well, it's not showing that many signs yet, so I'll not hold my breath.
Well, I went for a run at 7:30 this morning, and I looked at my watch, and it was 19 degrees. So it really took it out of me this morning. Anyway, we do these weekly chats. We sometimes have an agenda. We sometimes have a guest. This week we have an agenda, but no guest. And what we're looking at today is the Levelling Up agenda, and in all its various guises and how it affects schools. We have some simple rules for these. We don't try and slag any individual off. We are critical, but we hope we come up with some solutions. We try to be kind, and we're also aware of the fact that Stan and I are a little bit old, long in the tooth, and we have not been a head teacher for a little while, and we are respectful of the pressures that schools and head teachers, governing bodies and trusts are under at the moment. So we're not saying we've got all the answers. We're not saying that at all. So Stan, I think we normally start with anything that's caught your eye. So anything caught your eye this week?
Just this, and it does fit into what we're talking about. This morning on the news, there's a guy in New Orleans, I don't know if you saw him, Shamar Allen, who's doing trumpets for guns. He's a musician, a jazz musician, and he started a campaign to swap for children to bring guns in, and he'll give them a trumpet.
Wow.
Which is a fantastic guy. I was really taken with him. The sad thing was when they said, so how many of these, have you done? 7. It's only 7 so far. But what he said, which brings us back to this sort of levelling up and social mobility in a way, is he said this gives them the chance. They don't have these kind of opportunities where they live, neither did I. The difference was my parents were keen to keep me on the right road, and they bought me a trumpet, and I learned to play the trumpet. And so what he's sort of selling to the kids is, I'll give you the means by which you can move away from where you are if you give me a gun. And it was going back to something and we talked about last week. I think we talked about it off air, and I was saying that as well as aspiration and skills and everything else, children from disadvantaged areas need the means to get through the system.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because we haven't lined it up this way, but what's caught my eye this week. It's our, we were talking before, it's your 40th wedding anniversary coming up, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's our 40th wedding anniversary on the 16th of August. It's made me think about what my parents did to enable me to have some social mobility. And I think one of the things that's caught my eye was a photograph of my mother and father on their wedding day, and thinking about what they did for me in terms of education. And I think a lot of this was down to just the power of my mother, who was an Irish woman who was quite well educated, never went to college, but could read really well and could love poetry and wrote poetry. And I think that's sort of spun off on me. We had very few books in the house, but it was her sort of understanding that education was really important. So there was a local secondary school that I could have gone to in Basildon, but my mother insisted that I went 15 miles, taking 3 bus journeys to get to a secondary school in Southend. And that actually, I think, was quite influential in terms of my career path, because it was a better school than the one that was just down the road. So yeah, it's funny how when you get to these stage, 40 years, Stan, how many of our friends have survived 40 years with their partners? How many of their marriages have lasted that time?
Yeah. Well, just on what you were saying, I was reading a little bit more of Andy Hargreaves' book, Moving.
Oh, yes.
Night. And he talks about, the book's about his life, but it's actually about social mobility, really. And he talks about his three brothers, him and his two brothers, who all at the time were hit by the 11 plus. So that his oldest brother went to a secondary modern, his middle brother went to a technical school, and he went to a grammar school. And the bit that caught me was much years later, when they were in the 50s, they were in Canada, and his brother was doing some mechanical fixing of something, and Andy said to him, wow, you've really got some, a skill for that. Obviously you've had this skill. And his brother said, no, I'm not. I've got a skill for opera and singing and understanding all that. But for all my life, all my education, I was pushed to do these things. So it's just been hard work, but I can do it now.
Yeah.
We talk about, I know the government in the back of its mind has still got grammar schools are the answer to social mobility, despite any kind of evidence. And it's a worry that people still feel that's a way forward.
Yeah. Well, I didn't pass my 11 plus. The school that was 15 miles away was what's it called, secondary modern school. And I have to say, vocationally, the woodwork, as it was then, metalwork, wasn't design technology or anything like that, was poor. So actually, the only bits that I could hang on to were the art subjects. So, I had a great history teacher who I still have some contact with, who came over from the grammar school opposite at the age of 18 because I wasn't sure whether he was wanted to go into teacher training. And he was a born teacher, and it was he that got me interested in history in year 10, and that was enough to get me the O-level, a good grade at O-level at history. So in a way, all of this is just, the chances and the opportunities that you take. You can have the opportunity, but you don't take them. My mother was keen that every opportunity was taken. I'm grateful for Dave Milne and my mother for giving me those chances. I mean, this feeds into this levelling up agenda, doesn't it? Because I think there's been, I've been reading about a report that came out yesterday about the new funding arrangements where the government has agreed that no school will lose out, but actually some schools will gain more than others. And that research is suggesting that schools in the most advantaged areas, which because of the funding formula are not as highly favoured for funding, will actually get more. And so this levelling up, I think when we used the term levelling up, I think we thought those that needed more support, get the support. But what this means is actually levelling up could be about at the expense of those who need the additional funding, so that others can actually feel as though they're getting something out of this as well. And of course, this is politics at play here, isn't it?
It's also that phrase, I'm not sure if it's Covey who says it or Maxwell or someone, that treating people equally treating people the same isn't treating them equally.
Yes. Yeah, everybody understands, I think we've said this before, everybody understands the word equality, everybody gets that, but few people understand the term equity.
Yeah.
And actually, funding formulas are meant to provide equity. This one looks as though the levelling up agenda is being taken over by some sort of political dogma that enables local areas to get, that currently are not getting the same level of funding as others, and in my opinion, rightly so, are going to get more out of it. I mean, did I tell you about I think I mentioned on one of these video casts that Cheadle, the area I live, has got funding. It was, I think, out of the 550 or so applications, it was the 541st most deprived on the list. But it got, if ever that's a levelling up agenda going on here, and places that where I used to be the CEO of those communities, so it's just remarkable. I think also there's the levelling up is also affecting our exams at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, that's. I mean, the Scottish ones are of the first sort of test run, and it doesn't look good for people in disadvantaged areas, or schools that are actually improving, because it looks as though they're going to base a lot of it on how the schools performed previously.
Also, I mean, we talk about, there's a lot of talk about schools improving, but for everyone that's improving, there's probably another in decline. But those kids in those schools are actually going to be favoured by the fact that the year group before them were not as performing as poorly as they were or are. So, you know, in that respect, it feels to me, you know, as if it has made me think, not this incident, but, you know, the value of examinations as a mechanism for determining the potential and the ability or the ability of young people, when in fact, I'm not entirely convinced now that that way we do the examination process is the right way. But actually what's happened is they have rigor. That bit has the rigor because it's a test. Everybody sits in the room. They're all tested exactly the same way. But actually that makes it a very, very, very narrow range of skills that are being tested simply because there's rigor to it. And actually it does makes me feel as though there's a whole swathe of other skills, attributes that young people have that are completely ignored, but actually are crucially important for their future career success.
But we get them to spend their time aiming for that narrow band. So instead of developing their skills in music or art or design or
speaking and listening,
creative design for engineering, we push them into English, maths, science.
Yeah.
But
also just the narrowness of those experiences as well. You know, that it's got to be condensed down into a couple of 2-hour examinations as in terms of that being it. And it actually makes me feel as though, well, exams have the rigor, but I think teachers probably know the child a lot better, but we don't value that. And I think the examination, the way they're sorting the exams out this year, whereby they've simply asked the schools to rank them. And apparently, somebody said, one of the ministers said, or one of the Ofqual thing, they're going to be the same as last year. ... Broadly speaking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Key Stage 2 results have an impact as well, because for some reason, the Key Stage 4 results can't be significantly different from the Key Stage 2 results in proportionality. So, you know, it's an absolute...
Little did they know, those children know, that some test they did as an 11-year-old will be a factor in determining how well they've done at 16.
Yeah, and no, people don't know that. And so that, you know, they look at it as though it's equal because we're all doing the same test and we all get the same. But it's so not the case that you're right. It's about rigor and it looks right, but we're missing such an opportunity for lots of children and for the economy. You know, the creative arts are a massive input into the UK economy, and yet we're almost saying you can play about with that once you've left school. Not, you know, this is something we can develop in you in terms of skills, knowledge, understanding while you're there.
What will happen is people will watch this and say, "Oh, well, you're too soft lefties here. You're not really about, you know, challenge for young people. You sort of try and settle off at the lowest level you can get to." And they use these phrases like, well, what you suggest, it lacks any form of rigor. It's you know, it's open to abuse. It doesn't compare favourably with the way that other countries do it. And actually, I've got to a point where I'm thinking, well, that's probably a reason why we need to think about doing it differently, isn't it? Because actually, we've got half the children at 16 who are not getting maths and English, which is poor. But actually, what we're doing is we're siphoning those off and saying at that stage, there are courses now that are not suitable for you, regardless of whether or not actually you have got some real attributes in English. You might be weak in mathematics, but some real attributes in English, and these are opportunities now that are not going to be presented to you. It feels to me as if this GCSE is probably at the wrong time, but the one thing it does is siphons kids. And actually, for me, is a lot of children though who are siphoned off into very little, into fairly low-level courses, inappropriate programs, that sort of thing. And so we need to think about trying to keep as many people into that sort of broad field of education as we can. And actually, I do think that we need to value teacher assessment a lot more.
Yeah, and actually, we even the sort of advantaged, bright pupils might actually be heading for the wrong career choice because they're funneled that way. So we genuinely don't give them the opportunity to do other things unless, because of their advantage, they do things like music, art, wider than the school, and do that through parents who support that, as we started with, parents who see that as important.
It's interesting that another figure that is not very well known, I don't have the current actual figure, but a trend is probably the best way to describe it, is that the drop-off rate for apprenticeships is high. Sort of suggests that you hear a lot of parents and government saying we've got to push children down the apprenticeship route. I do feel as though there is some value in that. But they've got to land into an apprenticeship program that actually is appropriate for them. And actually, some apprenticeship at 16 is very, very early to be saying that actually, I want that apprenticeship, or even 18 saying I want that apprenticeship. It feels to me as if the number that will know whether that's right for them at that stage, I think, is quite low. And that's the reason why I think, as well as the quality of the courses, why some of those students don't see it through.
In 18, I'm not sure I knew what I really wanted to do. I mean, I went to teach training college because it was an easy option. I was more interested in football and drinking, I think, at that stage than planning a career.
Well, I went because I had a job. I didn't do my A-levels because of a health condition. I found myself quite going up a banking route. I was making a lot of progress, but actually I was looking at, as the further up the chain I got, I thought, well, there's some really dodgy stuff going on here. And I do remember a bank manager that I was working with selling stock, which is actually war stock, which means it's never going to get to the end of its time. But actually, it's just a very secure bit of investment being sold to this retired couple, and it was not. It was specifically not what they wanted. But actually, that stock looked really good for that bank manager when it came around to his annual performance, and that's the reason why he pushed it, and that's why he was telling us to push war bonds to customers. And it was at that point I thought, even then I thought, this is wrong, And he said, you don't like it, there's loads of other francs I can get, and I walked. So I went into teaching because of that, primarily.
What's interesting, going back to our earlier conversation, is that you went to a secondary modern school. I went to a grammar school, and probably 50 years later, we're not far apart in what we do. I mean, you've gone further than I have in.
Well, my brother Barry, who now lives in Swansea, who I see only occasionally. There was 16 months between us. He passed his 11 plus, went to a grammar school in sort of on the outskirts of London, and we both ended up as HMI. He in Eston, me in Ofsted. He has always been, a stronger academic than I've ever been. But actually, I do feel as though we had a different skill set because of the experiences we had. But actually, we ended up coming to the same goal.
Well, there's a lot of research in, I think it's in Outliers, but it might not be. It might be in something called David and Goliath, a book. which looks at American universities and kind of shows that to be top of a lesser university is a far better position to be in than to be at one of the very top universities but not be in the top group.
Yeah.
So the best success is being the most able in a smaller organisation than being not the most able but equally able in a large university.
This is the old Oxbridge thing, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
So, the drive to get to Oxbridge in itself is an amazing achievement, but actually it might not be the greatest achievement in terms of, you know, improving your personal opportunities, you know, going forward. I think when we meet next week, Stan, because we've had just over 20 minutes there,
Right.
it will be the day after the A-level results are out. So I think that it would be, I think, useful to revisit this again. Because, I mean, it's interesting. I've still got this thing about context and community, and I've got some more interesting data from Dr. George Leckie at the University of Bristol, which I'd like to chat to you about. But also, we were talking there about skills and apprenticeships and stuff like that. I didn't cover that because that's an area we've not actually covered before.
Yeah, that's fine.
Quite well with those A-level results as well. Because before will be all the BTEC results, which, or whatever. There'll be some results coming out the day before, which are more sort of vocational work. So it'll be interesting to see, how all of these are treated by the press.
Yeah, and let's be honest, by us.
Yeah.
Because you've just talked about the A-level results as being the key thing, and then, there's these other results coming.
I agree.
That's an issue with everybody in education, that I think it's this drive that Ken whatever says that, the only success in education is to become a professor. Anything else, and you've somehow fallen.
Yeah. But I'm sort of hardwired to it. This is the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
But actually, I do think that it's good to be able to, where sorry seems to be the hardest word. So all those that are taking vocational qualifications, I want to put on record here, they're as much of value as an A-level. But actually, I, Frank, need to make that so.
Yeah. But they're all only a stepping stone. I remember saying to my children when they were under real stress on doing their GCSEs that actually nobody's ever asked me how I got on with geography O-level.
Yeah.
Nobody's interested. Once you've got your next set of exams, that's the one that counts. And once you've got those, the next set.
Yeah.
And I probably set the wrong idea with Paul, because when he did his music exam...
It was your son, isn't he? It was your son.
Yeah. When he said one of the practical exams, you had to organise a band session and organise all the instruments. His band was called the 45 Percenters, because that was the pass mark.
And there lay the accused who say, well, actually, this is all about levelling down.
Yeah. 45%.
Well, thank you for the chat, Stan. And
thank you.
Who've listened to us this morning. Thank you for doing so. So next week we'll be picking up on on all the examination results.
Yeah.
People are reacting to them. I believe there's a protest in Scotland today about their hires. So hopefully that'll be picked up by the press. And we have a broader discussion, I think, in education about the effectiveness of an examination as the means of determining results of many years of education.
I know we're not critical and we don't slag people off, but I think we need to perhaps put Michael Gove in the crosshairs at some point.
I'll leave that to you, Stan. We'll pick that up next week. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.